Megan, I can't thank you enough for your time and coming on the latest episode of the On the Touchline podcast. And this is just a really, I mean, the work you're doing is incredibly valuable, and it's something that Aaron and I, we hear a lot in the work that we do as coaches. And that I want to read something from your website that I thought was really interesting. So let me pull it up here. So for folks listening to this, the Team Adult Playbook, Choosing to Build a Better Village of Our Sporting Kids, is a unique exploration of adult emotions around youth and high school team sports. It tackles the difficult conversations people avoid in the hopes that working through the tough stuff at the adult level will improve the sports experience for everyone. Sports requires emotional navigation. When experienced in a team setting, things are quickly complicated by the various relationships people must also navigate. Most adults work to attend to the emotional and mental well-being of the athletes, but spend little time self-reflecting or working on the emotional connections they have with those kids or with the adults around them. Improving the emotional awareness of adults involved in youth sports will positively enhance the experience for everyone who shows up to be a part of the team. So I guess my first question, tell folks a little bit about your backstory, and then we'll do a deep dive into some of those things on this particular episode. But what brought you, or sort of what inspired you to go in this direction, in this line of work?
Well, my husband and I have both been around and involved in sports our entire lives as athletes, and we were both coaches before we had children. For years, it's been what we've done. So I think I thought that I had it down. I knew what the sports world was. I knew how to do it. I knew how to navigate it. I knew how to live there until I had children. And until they started to show up on teams with people that I didn't necessarily know and coaches I didn't necessarily know. And I was a parent now in this environment. And being a sports parent was like landing on the moon for me in the sports world, which seems like ridiculous, except that I hadn't looked at the world of sports through that lens yet. I'd always been from the athlete on the field or the court. And then as a coach, you're on the opposite side of the field. And so by the time I was actually sitting in the stands with those people and navigating my own emotions, I realized I was really, really ill prepared to be on that side of the field, because it was a different experience watching my own children play than anything I had done up to that point. My husband's a hockey player and coach, so I got immersed into that world, didn't really read the fine print on the bottom of our marriage certificate or what that would mean. So I spent a lot of time in hockey rinks, and that was my kind of initial introduction to youth sports parenting. And if you want to see an emotionally charged environment, just go to a squirt level game that might determine where they're going to be in a tournament, and everyone's packed together in the stands. And that was so eye-opening to me. So because I was feeling this myself, and I realized I wasn't going to probably do it very well unless I knew more about it and more about it for myself, I needed to do some work. And this isn't the first project I've done like this. The first one I did was to save my marriage because I like my husband and I really wanted to be better at being married. So I did a first research project around that. And then I felt the same sorts of incompetencies around being a youth sports parent and felt like, okay, I need to do this here too. And so started the process of researching. And my oldest was 10, he's now 19. So for about 9 years now, I've been really invested in interviewing people, reading everything I could, in surveys, going and kind of immersing myself in understanding what it is to be the best kind of sports parent I can. But it's also informed me as a coach too, to just see it from the adult perspective on all sides of the field.
I feel like the sporting environment for young people is one that it's a lot of different things, right? It feels like high pressure. It feels like, the stakes each year sort of get raised higher and higher. It feels like people are coming in hot, so to speak, in terms of their emotions the minute they get out of their car, whether it be to, walk to a soccer pitch, whether it be to walk into an ice hockey rink, a baseball field, a basketball court, whatever it might be, that they're sort of coming in hot in terms of, oh, I want this, or, this determines sort of my wealth or my worth as a parent. And I'm really appreciative of your backstory, Megan, because I feel like I've felt that as a coach, but also as a coach and a parent of a youth player, in that recognizing what those feelings actually are, and recognizing that um, you know uh, there's a lot involved than actually what just happens, on a field, on an ice hockey rink, a court, whatever it might be. So what do parents really need to know? And where should they even start?
Well, I think the starting part is the mirror, and that is a really difficult thing to ask people to do, because emotions, especially the ugly ones, we really try to avoid. It's sort of our cultural expectation to just push them aside, to not feel them, to just pretend they don't exist. And the sporting world is innately filled with emotion. Like you said, people are coming in hot. It's almost like that is a place we know that we as a society can show up to emote. We're going to emote there. And we like that. It's human to be emotional. And sports provide a really, really good vehicle to do that. So that is part of why we love sports. And to be analytical about that is not fun. To just be emotional is really fun, whether it's a bad emotion, an ugly emotion, a yelling emotion, a happy, like just being emotional without having to think about it. That's great. So the mirror, and asking adults to turn the mirror and look at their emotions, to hear themselves in the way that they speak when they're in an environment where emotion is happening, that is a really difficult ask. But that is the ask. That is the ask that I have for the people that I feel want to be invested in their relationships with their children, the relationships with the athletes they coach, the relationships with the people around them. Because until they look in the mirror and really want to see how those emotions are affecting their behavior, because the emotions are going to show up. I still haven't found a way to stop my like mama bear, someone taking out my kid sort of emotion. That comes, like I can't stop that. But what I learn, and when I'm practicing, and when I try to encourage for the people who talk to me about it, is to take that and make sure you choose the best behavior with that emotion. So you can't change the way you feel, but you can change the way you behave. The first and foremost thing, though, is to acknowledge the emotions are there. Try to figure out if it's bigger than the moment of this ref being an idiot. Are you angry about something else in your life? And really, really taking that time to be introspective. But again, not really what people want to do, but that is, I think, what people need to be doing.
Aaron, pull you in.
It's as you said. I mean, you obviously hit on the key term of emotion, and I mean, we do go to sporting events, professional. I mean, our kids, without our kids, and because I mean, I just supporting my favorite soccer team. I feel that anxiety if they're not doing well, and I'm not physically connected to those people, emotionally maybe, but not physically. And so as a parent, you're both emotionally and physically connected to that player. And
Yep.
so and so how do you kind of juxtapose those things, as far as I want to be emotional and I want to cheer or be sad if things go my way or not go my way, but not to put those onto the performance of my child.
Right. And that is definitely still in practice for me. I don't think that I've absolutely arrived there. There is, so my oldest, or my middle daughter, my oldest daughter, is a hockey goalie. So if there's anything to challenge my emotional presence with her, and that's been a challenge in watching objectively. So that's what I try to do. I try to approach, when I go to her games, imagining that I'm an alien who's simply landed in this place, and look at the game from as objective a perspective as I can, and to watch it in that way. Then when I have my physical and emotional reactions with her afterward, I really work hard to just support her as a person, outside of her pads, outside of her helmet, and to let her drive where we go. And I think oftentimes when I watch, especially when their child has had a bad performance, or even if they've had a good performance, they come and their reaction right away is how the parent has felt about that, instead of asking and stepping into, okay, how did you feel about that? And that simple flip of a question for her makes me realize that really this is her game and I'm here to support her. And then I ask her, do you need to hear me on the sideline? Do you need to, like, what do you need? Because this is your game. And this is why it's different for me than watching a professional game, where those professionals are there really for my emotion, let's be honest. But our children are there, we're raising them. So for us to be fans at their events and not parents, we lose a little bit of what we can provide for them. And so that's a flip for me, is making sure that I recognize that I'm not just a fan at those games. And actually, I'm more importantly a parent at those games. And so how do I parent my children after and during their performances?
That's amazing perspective to look at it. And I never thought about it till you just said it. Don't be a fan of you can be a fan of your child,
Yep.
but don't solely be a fan. You have to be. That's fantastic. I love the way you put that. But the other thing, Jason and I both played goalkeeper. So, and I hear my mom and soccer, obviously, and my mom was always like, "Oh, being a goalkeeper's parent is the worst position, worst place to be as a coaching, or as a player's parent." And so my son he plays, and he's kind of dabbling in goalkeeper, and he played in a little indoor tournament for the first time, full-time goalkeeper a couple of weeks ago. And now I really feel like what my mom felt like, because I'm like, oh gosh, please save that ball. Please save that ball.
I know. And then there's this reaction I did just the other day. She didn't have a great game, and she's now a senior, so I've done this with her for a long time. But what's amazing to me is I sit and watch, and I don't, then all of a sudden people don't make eye contact with me. And so I'm like, but I'm not playing, and I nothing to do with, but they almost don't even know what to say to me or how to react to me. And so I'm like, it's a really, really interesting, and because I'm observing in such a really like research sort of way, they don't know that I'm like, wow, that's really interesting behavior. I'm not really sure why you're not making eye contact with me. But if I were just experiencing, I'd be a little put off. Like, what? I didn't have anything to do with that. But it is interesting. So yeah, if you're going to go down that route, just know it's going to be an interesting ride. Even though you've already played, it's not the same thing.
Oh
it's
gosh,
totally not
no.
the same thing.
Gosh, no. I mean, it's interesting too that you say they're avoiding eye contact with you. Are they avoiding eye contact with you because they're mad because the team let in a goal, or are they avoiding because they're thinking, oh man, she must be frustrated or sad?
Right.
I just don't want to.
I think they're just holding a whole lot of emotion they don't know what to do with, to be honest. And I think you're right. I think there's the frustration. They assume I'm embarrassed. I'm not, because I've gotten better at that. So you're right. I think they just think, boy, there's gonna be a lot of ugly emotion between us. Let's just not look at each other. Let's just pretend it's not there.
Yeah. I mean, I think you say you're not embarrassed. Of course you're not embarrassed, because you are a fan, but you're also being a parent. And I think the biggest thing for our children and even our players, because that we coach, because in some ways they're underneath us, like, we're responsible for them like our children, do not attach your self-worth to your performance.
Right. Good or bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Good or bad.
Right.
And I mean, I think that's something important to look at. Don't ever, oh, I've played amazing, so I'm this amazing human, or I played poorly, I have no self-worth. And so that's so important too, as a parent, after matches or games, that your child is able, or your players are able to tell you their thoughts, because freely, instead of thinking, man, if I played poorly, then I'm not a good person, or I've devalued myself or my relationship with because I think that's a huge thing too, is that especially parent player, that if they feel like if you're not happy with their performance, then you're not happy with them as a human, and you're devaluing that relationship. And I think that's so important that you continue to get across to those that you're educating, and those in your sphere. And I mean, I think, and maybe we'll talk about this in a little bit later, but I mean, just for my college team, I do a parent meeting with our parents at the beginning of the season, every season. And that's some of the things that I try to discuss with them is you're not responsible for your child's performance.
Right.
And your value as a parent isn't directly related to their performance.
Right.
And so those are things that are really important to me. And I just try in my little way to help them understand that. But gosh, they probably look at me and go, shut up.
I just want to feel. I just want to go and watch these games and feel whatever I want to feel. Don't tell me. Yeah.
Exactly.
Show up and yell at the coach, you know?
Yeah. That feels better. That feels good.
We've all been there. We've all been there.
Yes, we have. So Meagan, I heard something recently, this was on a different podcast, talking about the sort of the history of pay to play in the US. And I'll tie this all together here. Just follow me for a sec. It was talking that in the 1970s that, there was a movement culturally where parents from a variety of sports, and, we'll use soccer since this is a soccer podcast, that parents said that I want to pay a professional, quote unquote professional, to coach my kids. And because I am a paying customer, that now gives me more rights and responsibilities, right? So in terms of being a little more vocal, in terms of voicing my opinion, in terms of, giving compliments, storming off in a huff, I'm sure Aaron and I have seen it all. I'm sure you've seen it all, the good, the bad, the ugly. I wonder what your research has shown. And, do those timelines sort of coincide with one another, that because of things like pay to play, and it's happened in a rec environment too, to be fair. I've seen the same type of behavior and, some craziness really from parents. But I wonder what you found, in researching this topic that has really stood out to you.
I would say that, yes, it certainly matters. Oh, I think I'm unstable. You got me now? Is that better? Okay,
yeah, you're
sorry.
Good. No.
That the amount of investment in a child's experience, whether it's money or time, those two things add pressure to the environment immediately. And so it also is going to heighten the level of emotion around that because of the investment. Anything that we feel invested in, whether it's financial or emotional, is going to have a higher level of intensity. So for my research across the country, because I have access to all sorts of different kinds of communities, and I'm from Colorado originally, but we live in Wisconsin. So Wisconsin soccer in my small little football town is incredibly different than soccer in suburbs of Denver. And I have friends who've got children in those clubs and academies and playing all sorts of things. And I have a very small, tight little community. So it does matter. That sort of the environment matters as far as what happens with people's perspective. And so if you've only been in one environment and that's all you know, and you think this is the way that the world has to be and operates at this highly, highly pressurized environment, you'll live in that world of emotional just distress all the time and not even realize that that's what's going on. If you are in a place like I am, they don't even realize that even exists. So it certainly matters what exposure people have to that pressure. But I say that the pay to play environment isn't everywhere. That's basically, you picking and choosing where you are with your family, with your kids. There are different pockets for different sorts of experiences. And a lot of it has to do with what's already maybe been created or what people have paid into and invested in over time.
Do you think that, trying to think how I want to ask this, that, we as coaches are trying to empower our players to, make their own decisions, right? And to really have ownership of their experience, their journey, in my case, I want some of the younger players I'm working with to really build a lifelong love of, in this case, soccer, and just, build that affinity. So for a parent, where do they start, right? How do they even recognize? Because I like what you said earlier about the mirror. I wonder how does that even start to have that conversation? Does that come from a club to a parent? Does that, if I'm standing on the sideline, I'm just watching a match that my son's playing in, do I find a way to pull somebody aside and say like, hey, like I noticed you're really you're really charged today, you're really wound up. Like what, can we help? I mean, you know, here's a therapist.
Yeah, right. I know. I was just telling my husband the other day that I need to make a stand or something. Lucy in Charlie Brown, she has that like advice kiosk or whatever,
Yeah.
and just go set it up and see if anybody even comes over to chat. And not a game that I know anyone, just like pop up in some random place. I've seen it happen in both scenarios. So there are some organizations, Positive Coaching Alliance does a lot of stuff to try to mitigate from the front end with those conversations with parents and coaches, and they do a good job in the program, and they do. They're not everywhere though, so that's it's not as accessible to everybody. The grassroots effort also works. As you know, everything that is effective is based on relationship building. Whether you are in a coaching environment and you're building good relationships with your team, or the teammates, or relationship building with each other, same thing happens when you're talking about a group of adults on the sideline. And so it happens slowly. I think that's the hard thing. Everybody really wants it to be this like, what do I do right now? Because there's crazy parents right now. And sure, you can go over and just be like, hey, joking around and try to calm it down if it's an immediate sort of thing. But if you want any sort of long-term solution, it's full on community relationship building, period. And I think the really hard part about youth sports right now is that there is this lack of interest in that community, and people don't stay put even for their own kid because they see another team that might be a better fit for and they're hopping and it's kind of what happens. And it's not just soccer. I definitely see it with all the sports where, their kid is getting good and they want to take them to the very best team. And then the community is missing from that. And you can't build it if you're not there to have a relationship with people. And so then there's all these strangers getting together every season. You have like very little time to get to know each other. And so it is much harder to mitigate now than it might have been, 15 or 20 years ago, where people would stay in their communities and they could build community there and relationships. And you could have a conversation that was real because you knew each other really well. It is harder. It's harder now, but I've seen it from both ends, from top down, where clubs are trying to have these conversations across the board with all their teams. And then from the grassroots effort where there's a plant, like on the sideline, let's try to just quietly take care of this group of people who are crazy, and they're not all crazy. They just might have a crazy day.
Mm-hmm. Well, so tell me about the good ones, and what does that look like? Because I think a lot of attention gets paid to, the stories that we see on social media and in the news, and people climbing literally over the glass at a hockey match,
Right.
A hockey game to fight somebody, or I mean, we've all seen it. We've seen it in soccer too, and we've seen some ridiculous stuff at times. And
Yeah.
not only abuse of players, abuse of referees, parent to parent interactions, parent to coach interactions. So what are the good ones doing that might be a key takeaway for people listening to this? They can say, ooh, that's a really good nugget or two that maybe I could put in my back pocket. Maybe I could work on locally, in my area.
I think, and I mentioned this in some of the things that I write, it's about team building at the adult level. Okay, so the things that work for your kids when you're coaching them that are team building activities that are either off the field or on the field, where you're doing some sort of creative game where they have to problem solve together while they're at practice, or they've gone out to a movie and dinner. So those are the things we do with our teams, right? If we're going to do that at the adult level, what does that look like? Well, it looks like, for me, trying to have events that are outside of soccer where we all go, say sledding or something, or we just offer it up as this something that's not even having to do with soccer at all, where there is a chance to build relationship, team building for that group of people that are coming together. And I know that a lot of times this will happen like at a bar, or it'll happen at a restaurant for food. And those are great things too for parents and adults to get together and to commiserate. It can snowball badly depending on the timing for this. If it's after a game or during tournaments, these are really kind of a tough. So getting it outside of their normal comfort zone for engagement. And that's a challenge, but I think something that I've seen work for groups of people. I think that relationship building is probably the biggest thing, and finding a way that they can engage with each other, get to know each other when they're not the sideline version of themselves, because we're not all that way. We all have that crazy tendency, and we see each other, if we just see each other there, just on the sideline, it's not the best version or the most complete version of ourselves. And so that's why I'm trying to pull out into doing other things. I've heard of teams, like going on long bike rides together, the parents, the adults. So that kind of thing, being and coaches helping to facilitate that, and not just leaving it to a team mom to do this, because, and I say team mom, but I didn't mean to make that sound like the old team mom. I think team mom's changed. So let me just say that too. But leaving it to a parent to lead. I think if a coach is invested in having those relationships with the parents, and it's a really scary thing. A lot of coaches don't want to do that. They don't want to cross over the field. Really, they want to kind of keep this level, this veneer. But you don't have relationship if you do that. If you keep yourself so separate from the adults who are also helping to raise these children, then you can't really get at some of the bigger issues when that conversation is necessary, because you haven't built a relationship yet. So I think coaches who can kind of help to find a way, how can we be social? How can we be problem solving? I don't know, maybe go to an escape room with just the adults on your team, something like that, would be ideas that I think I'm still employing, I'm still learning, and I don't know that I've totally got it, but there are things that are working better. We've had big soccer games with all our adults with like a huge soccer ball. We played walking soccer one time because not all the people can play soccer, so everybody had to walk. But just, being creative like that, where we were doing something as a group.
I think you said an interesting thing about coaches and parent relationships, and this is something that I have tried to communicate with our parents of our college players, is that I can separate my relationship with you as a person as opposed to your daughter's ability or for lack of a better term, lack of ability, whatever it might be, playing time, and have that relationship. And because I think they think, well, if my daughter's not playing, then I'm mad at that coach. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason it is. And if your daughter doesn't play or she does play, I don't care. That doesn't affect my relationship, my personal relationship with you. And I try really hard to do that, but it is a two-way street. You're right. Yep. The coach has to be willing to step over that line, and B, the parents have to be willing to do that. The parents have to be willing to have that relationship and separate. Okay, Aaron or Jason or Meagan are a human first and a coach second.
Yep.
And they're separate. And
yep.
So I think that's super huge to create that relationship. And it's hard. It's definitely mm-hmm. hard from both sides. It's easy when your child plays all the time, because mm-hmm. everything's good. You're mm-hmm. happy, and your daughter or son is playing, and then, but if they're not playing, I go into those relationships open arms, but sometimes it's not reciprocated for whatever reason. And again, that's tying their child's performance to their personality. And I think that's right. Obviously not right. And the other thing too, I think, how often, and I think because from the top down, you talked about with the parent behavior, the clubs themselves set standards and expectations for parents, just like they set for the athletes. I mean, do you see that happening?
Oh yeah, definitely. Setting up contracts even for parents to sign prior to the start of the season, where their expectations are very clearly laid out. And it works somewhat as far as laying out what those expectations are, but again, it's the relationship. I mean, how well do we really respond to rules? We'd much prefer to respond to people mm-hmm. that we trust and people that we have a relationship with. But yeah, the rules are a great place to start, and expectations for what it is what's our culture? Like, who are we? How do we do things here? What does it look like to be a parent in this program? And yeah, for sure, that needs to be very explicitly explained from the beginning all the way through, holding people accountable, because otherwise there's just not a standard for which people can operate.
You always see, just like with your athletes, and especially as they get older and older, the ones, they always tend to gravitate towards the ones that have the same attitude as them, positively or negatively.
Mm-hmm.
And you get those that don't play a lot and they're frustrated. So what do? They look to find the other ones that are frustrated too, because they make each other feel good about themselves. I think parents do the same thing.
Yep.
I think parents find that group. Oh, our daughters don't play a lot, or our sons don't play a lot, so we can be together and commiserate together.
Yep.
And then you get the one parent that sits, and I don't know how it is in hockey, but the one parent in soccer that sits all the way down at the other end of the field and doesn't want to be around any other parents, you know. And
Yes.
so you get these different groups, which is probably a whole parody that you could do.
Well, I have a whole like list of personalities that are like described, and I've been that parent sometimes where I go all the way down to I've been the one in the middle. I've tried to like play all these roles, and depending on the day, depending on how I'm feeling, depending on how loud the group is that's next to me, I'm an introvert, so for me, I have to pay attention to what my energy system, how that looks. So yeah, there's lots of ways that different personality types even engage with sports. And so one of the things that I've talked about in presentations I've done and things that I write is that the toxicity only happens when a personality goes in a negative behavior route. Because you can't change your personality, can't change the stripes of who you are, but you can choose how you respond to the way the emotions arrive, to the way that your personality would potentially like default to. You can make choices, and I've made choices to be, okay, fine, I'm going to come into the mix. I'll sit right in the middle with everyone. I will, and you can choose that. And that is, I think, too mindlessly, we go through our time on the sideline as parents where we're just not paying attention to what we're doing in a way that think about it as parents, because the fan experience has become such a part of our culture that we just we're blurring that line too much between being a fan and being a parent. And that is what's probably causing the biggest problem. And my big advocacy is for these kids, for all these kids. I'd love to just see them at their greatest potential as people. And sometimes that includes with a ball at their feet or a puck on a stick. Sometimes that is their greatest potential, but sometimes it's not. And their highest potential is only going to be reached if the adults around them, coaches, parents, the other parents who are also at those games, everybody is invested in making really, really great people. And that's really my whole point in all of it.
We're all a team. We're all and I say this to our parents of our student athletes every year. I can't do this job to the best of my ability without the support of the parents, the student athletes, because again, we're all trying to create good people and utilize this opportunity through soccer or through hockey or whatever it is to become better people. And it just so happens that we all love soccer or hockey, and that's the commonality that brings us together. So let's use our commonality to make each other greater and become more higher character people.
Yep.
I find it really fascinating that I actually wonder if we've set parents up for failure. And I asked this question because, again, sort of follow along with me here for a sec, that, starting at a very young age, right, everybody's playing. We're going to have equal playing time. We're going to give everybody a shot. We've seen 10th place trophies, 8th place trophies, whatever it might be. And that, you're going to get this because, we want to give this to you for whatever reason. And that so that's a foundational thing at a very young age for a player to learn that, or for a parent to learn that. Then as they progress, there doesn't seem to be a progression in the thinking, at least in my experience, of, well, it's always going to be this way. Yet the circumstances, the environment, the coaches, the age, the maturity of everyone involved has evolved and, has gotten a little bit older. And I wonder if, sort of trying to bridge that gap of saying and Aaron, you probably see this a lot, and I saw it with my high school players, that only 11 people can play at a time, on a soccer team, right? I mean, I would love for a 25-person roster that we could all trot on out there and have a ball. But we can't do that. So, I think it's equally challenging to manage the expectations of what people have. And we live in this world of like, if something's not right, like we're immediately like going to go for the throat, and like, the outrage about everything, and it's like, I mean, Meagan, you nailed it about the relationships, right? And I would even add another word to that: communication. And like, what is normal, sort of expected type of communication? Because I've been in environments where there was lacking communication, but I've also been in environments where there was probably over communication. And that, sometimes, there, and it's a balance. I mean, it's truly walking that tightrope of like, how much information do people need to know? But, information is power. Information allows people to feel like they're part of the loop, and good and bad. So I'm on a tangent here. I tend to do that on this show.
Well, you started with the idea of whether we've set our parents up for failure. Yeah. And I think the system certainly lends itself to failure for the purposes that you mentioned, in that there's a funneling that happens, right, with athletes. And we really want to produce high performing athletes, and we want to have high performing athletes on the teams we coach. And as far as we can get these players to go as to their potential, that is a worthy goal. And the problem is there's not an alternative. That's it. That is the only way we have to offer children to get through sports, is through that funnel. And it makes me sad that there's not this all-encompassing adult recreation sort of vibe about sport. We don't have that. We don't have a culture, especially at the high school level, where, I have potentially for this spring, I have 60 girls coming out for 1-2 teams. And do I want any of them to be cut in this town? No, I would love to have all of them involved in a program that helps them and they get a chance to grow there. I don't know that it's possible, but I don't have another option to tell them, well, just go play for this community team, or just go play for this intramural team. Or it's about resources, it's about field space, it's about a whole bunch of things that make the funneling necessary. Because, little kids, we have a lot more room for little kids we can put lots of them out on the field. As they get bigger physically and the maturity changes and competition happens and they really want their funneling, makes it impossible to maintain that sort of play, because playing is fun. There is I don't know what the solution is. I definitely see the problem. That is part of the problem. Part of the problem is that funneling, and parents panic. I heard so many parents when I was interviewing them why they were so intent on having their child over-programmed and over-scheduled and overdoing it, when I would say, this is not good for their 10-year-old body. This is not good for their 10-year-old mentality. And they'd say, if I don't do this, they won't make a high school team. And they're afraid of that. They're afraid of not being able to have a place for their kid to be part of these teams that we know are important and we know grow them. But we don't have it within us to make other teams or other leagues. And I don't know the solution. I just know that is certainly part of the problem. And it does add to the stress in those communities that have a lot more players than they have spots for on the teams. Suburbs, I would say, of a lot of the cities where I interviewed with, is a huge issue there for the pressure of the small, younger kids because of that, because there's just not another option. And it doesn't feel as good to say, well, they didn't make the high school team, they're going to go play for this other like fun team. But why we can't wrap our heads around that still being really valuable for them as people, I'm not really sure what the answer would be there. But yeah, right now the system's failing that, because we start out with, we want them to be involved, we want them to be active, we want to be playing, and then, just know in a couple years, it's going to get really, really hard and nasty, and you're going to need to find a way to get your kid funneled. And so they do. They work, they position, they get just on fire, I think is what you were saying, why they show up, because that pressure, they know it. Whether it's something they've said out loud, they innately know it's a ticking clock. And they don't have very long to get their kid in the right spot to be in the funnel, to be in the right spot.
Well, I think for the three of us and, people listening to this, that I tell my wife this all the time, that being a former athlete, there's always a competitor inside.
Mm-hmm.
There's this, I mean, that's why I played sport. That's why I love sport, is that competing against somebody to, and to win, or to prove my own worth, or whatever were the reasons I was doing it, to just enjoy it. So as I've gotten older, I think, Aaron and I were actually talking about this a little bit last week, of recognizing those moments when we're sort of getting elevated and escalated as coaches. And, it's hard though. And I've failed at it thousands of times. I fail at it over the course of a season numerous times. But it comes with being able to take a step back and hit the pause button and have, I don't know if people would call it emotional maturity, or perspective, or whatever it might be, that when it stops becoming fun, and it stops becoming, it really feels sort of burdensome to a coach or a player or a parent. I would say from my own experience that people really need to be able to hit the pause button, because there is an arms race in youth sports, and this isn't specific to soccer. I've seen it with my nephew in baseball, and you've probably seen it in hockey and other sports. There's an arms race to keep up with the Joneses. And
Mm-hmm.
it is exactly what you said, Meagan, and I've seen this with kids I've coached, younger age kids. They're so overprogrammed. I mean, and they show up and they're almost ready to fall over,
Mm-hmm.
because they're tired, and then they have to go home and do homework. And then I got to go here, and I got to go here, and blah, 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 blah. And then it's a ping pong match of like, where am I going now? Whereas, and I think they feel sort of societal, what you said, of like, I'm not going to make the high school team, or I'm not going to make this, quote unquote elite, travel team, or premier team, or whatever the heck they call it. It's keeping up with the Joneses. And I think parents have to be okay. And this is the hard part. They have to be okay with being able to hit the pause button and say, what is best for us?
Mm-hmm.
We're not doing it because the guy down the street or the family down the street is doing it. We're doing it because this is truly the best decision for our son and daughter, and for us as a family.
Yep.
Yep. People making some sense there.
Well, and we've lived in a lot of places, and one of the places where my kids were the most intently just overwhelmed with stress and pressure was a suburb of the Twin Cities, and that was where they were all playing hockey and soccer. And we had an opportunity to move back to this town where I live now, and we've lived here 3 times. Long story, we could not figure our lives out to save whatever, so we've moved a lot. And it came up, our kids were of the right age to ask them, okay, you guys have lived lots of places, and this is an opportunity your dad has to coach, and so do you want to move back to this small town, or do you want to stay? And we were going to leave it to the kids to decide whether we did, the move or not. And all 3 of them, and I'm so, like, I don't know why I didn't think about how lucky I was that all 3 of them said the same thing, but they did. And they all wanted to move back to the smaller town, and they all were able to verbalize, because they didn't like that race. They didn't like that pressure. They didn't like that ping pong feeling that we were living. If I had, at the point in that, in their life as their mom, and we weren't able to move or something, that would have been and should have been a good question to ask them anyway. We had the move to start that conversation, but I am grateful that we were able to ask them, each of them, okay, so what kind of environment do you want? What kind of environment feels good to you? And then find the environment that fits each kid. And that takes a lot of intentionality. It takes a lot of guts, because really a lot of times, I mean, there were so many people that were like, you're moving where? And don't you know that sports are really, yep, they're going to be different for us there. And, what if our kids don't end up on a certain track to play where, what if? I wanted to have a great relationship with our children. I still am working on that great relationship with our children. That is the most important thing to me. And so in 20 years, when, they are bringing their own children back or putting their own kids into sports, I want to be a part of their life in a way that is positive. They don't resent me. We're not bitter. We're at a really good place. And that is part of how we have to choose our sports decisions too. I mean, that is how we're raising our children. So for us personally, if you haven't got to move on the verge, you're not going to have to move anywhere with your family. It's still worth it to sit down every season with your kids and ask them how they feel about what they're being asked to do, how they feel. And if they just say, you know what, I need this season off, take the season off. But if you're not going to listen to the kids at all and just go through the motions of, because the train's moving, we don't want to not be on the train. I think it does a lot of damage to the kids and to the relationships that you could have with those kids without the conversation. And, it's tough. It's so hard to be the one that's the outlier and not do what everybody else is doing. But if you're not taking care of the health of your own house, I mean, that's literally the only place you can really institute any sort of control. And it's been huge saver for us. And like I said, I'm grateful they all were happy to move to a smaller town, but it's been good.
I love the self-awareness, not only for yourself, but as a family, to recognize that, you're reaching sort of that tipping point of it being too much, right? And I think about this, just even my own struggles, with my parents at times and related around sport. And exactly, you said a really powerful word in terms of resentment, right? I don't want my 3 kids that when they're in their 30s or if they're bringing grandkids here someday to go, God, mom and dad forced me to do that, right? And they made me do it. Now, I will say there's a time and place, right? To sort of, to push your kids, right?
Yep.
But I think there's and that's not to say that we keep our kids in a bubble and that they're never going to experience tough things in their life or whatever. There are times you have to push them and kind of nudge them to work through some of that adversity or their own internal, I just don't want to do it because I don't want to do it sort of thing. But you also mentioned something else about listening to your child. And I can't overstate how incredibly valuable and important that is. They give you the answers, right? This isn't a test that you have to cram and sort of, pull an all-nighter for. Mm-hmm. They literally hand you the answers. Kids can be incredibly, beautifully honest. If you've created that environment in your home where they can just share like how they feel about a situation. And that ties into, something that I want to talk about of, the ride home, right? And that could be after practice, that could be after a match, a game, whatever. And the really powerful dynamic that it could be an incredibly positive experience. Or, I experienced as a youth athlete that it was like critique time. And, why didn't you do this? And why didn't you do that? And blah, 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 blah. Yeah, no shit. I knew that I knew I needed to probably do this and I didn't and I failed. And that's what happened that day, I wonder in, talking to a wide variety of people that if that ever came up in conversations and, how people sort of navigate that, or maybe even what advice you could say just from talking to all these different folks you've spoken to.
Yeah, the car coach Carl is the name of that character that I created. And it seems like a good parenting idea, right? Because you want to give all your wisdom to your children, and of course they're listening just very attentively their entire lives to everything you have to say. So we know that the car coaching is probably not really all that effective. But I a couple years ago started to employ what I'll term like my journalistic strategy. So because I am a journalist in nature, I started to pretend I was interviewing my kids when they would get in the car to talk about their game from their perspective, as if I hadn't been there. So not in an interview like, really legitimately, but I would ask questions that were more on that objective journalistic sort of slant, as opposed to the leading question, of, so do you really think you played that ball really well that went to the center and they scored? Like, that would be a leading question. But the question I would ask instead would be, so how did you feel about today's game? Stop. And not finish anything, not add any more of my impression, because that is, every time I have a perspective about something from the sideline, it's from an adult lens, and 30 some years on a soccer sideline. And there's plenty of I can't turn some of that off. There's a lot of people that'll ask when I watch my kids play, so you look at this as a coach, I'm like, I can't help it. That's just how my brain is developed where it does with soccer. Is I see everything. So of course I see all these mistakes that everybody's making all the time, but it doesn't mean I have to say anything about it at all. So it helps me to then lead into that. Okay, where is my kid right now in their understanding and perspective about it? And then to lead into, so what would you do different about today's game? Is there anything that you would change? And listen again to the answers. And it's been interesting and fun to watch them develop in that. My youngest is our soccer player still. My oldest is in college, and he stopped playing his senior year in high school, but my youngest still plays soccer, and she is the one that I've gotten the best at interviewing because she's our third, and I do get better. We did get better at raising our children. My poor first, whatever. He'll make it at some point.
I feel this in my heart and in my soul, Megan.
Oh man, I wish I hadn't screwed up so much with him, but he'll be all right. But the littlest, I'm much better at interviewing, and sometimes I'll just even pretend that I haven't been at the game at all, and I'll just say, okay, so tell me, what was your favorite play? Describe it to me, even though I just saw it. What she sees from the field and from her perspective and as she's learning is really different. And so then I just get interested in that, and I'm fascinated by that. And I don't feel as though I have to have an answer. She's getting to the age now where she's starting to ask me questions because, of my experience and that I coach, and she's now old enough where she really is invested in wanting to know. And then I'll answer her questions. But if it's unsolicited advice, how well do any of us do with unsolicited advice? Let's be honest. So our kids don't want to hear it either. Just ask them how their day was.
Aaron,
I was just thinking through this because I'm thinking through this as a parent, and I'm thinking through this as a coach as well, knowing that each one of the players that I coach talk to every one of their parents after each game.
Yeah.
And what are they saying? Because as a coaches, we're so invested in our individuals because we have these relationships, and how do they see that? And are they looking, are their parents critiquing them, or are the players looking to get reinforcement of what they might have done or they didn't do or whatever? And so I've always said to our parents, it's not your job to solve the problems for your adult children. I mean, I'm taking this from a perspective of a collegiate athlete, student athlete,
Right.
And so it's not their job. They're there to support. They're there for emotional support and not to solve problems. And I think that's one of the things that it's important for parents to not fuel the fire, not pile on.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're asking open-ended questions, or even if you're just probing and they give you, well, I should have done this or I should have done that, and then you start piling on, then it becomes even worse for that child. And so I think that's important. And when I think about my own son or my own daughter, I just think, as you said, the journalistic side, just how did you feel? Did you enjoy that? Because really that's it. And if they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to talk about it.
Right.
And sometimes that's okay. I mean, we got to have a cooling off period too. Do you ever come across people that have a cooling off period, or we can't talk about the game for 30 minutes or however long it is that you decide arbitrarily after matches or games?
Well, yeah, I definitely have the rule with my youngest. That's her rule. My older two would talk right away. Part of that, and that's the relationship that you have with people. You realize where their points of contention might be. And some people, like, they literally shouldn't be talking to anyone after a game for a while. Like the 24-hour rule exists for a reason, where they tell people to just cool off, because heart rates rise when people watch. They know that heart rates rise watching an emotional contest, and the tighter the game, the more pressure the game, the higher the heart rate goes, and the less reasonable decisions people make. So if your heart rate's over a certain, you literally don't say anything rational. You should just walk away. So depending on the nature of the game, for sure, that cooling off period is necessary. And I think knowing your kid too. So my youngest is the most complicated because she's the quietest. And so getting her and still learning about her. And now that she's 14, she's a totally different kid than she was when she was 10, because, you know, they turn into these little monsters. I love them. I love teenagers. That's what I teach and coach. But they are different than they were when they were little. So I'm having to discover her every day and every week. And so that takes some time too.
Yeah, I try so hard over the years of evolution as a coach and taking that into a parent, is that, you know, just trying to make sure that anything that we say to our child doesn't have any relation to self-worth or defining yourself by that, because I mean that's so important. And I know that, you know, these players gain so much from this experience. And you were talking about earlier, all the different funneling of avenues and the experience. They can gain so much of it if they appreciate whatever role that they're in. If they're a starter or if they're a support player, if they don't ever get to play, they still can gain so much from that experience, because as we're trying to create these good humans and they're growing and learning through this love of sport, you know, because I was looking through your Twitter, and I say this to our players all the time. You had retweeted somebody that said, in 20 years from now, no one will care how many points you scored or how many championships you won or if you even played. Mm-hmm. It's how you treat people and how you treat yourself. And I think that's the most important thing that we're gaining from this. And so if we can relay that to our child, this is about you developing as a person, not if you won or lost, not if you scored 20 points or 1 goal or 2 goals or whatever it is. It's how are you developing and how are you treating others? Because, you know, I try to, and Jason mentioned this earlier, we have 28 people on our roster. I wish 28 people could play, but in 20 years from now, nobody will say, oh, you played college athletics? Oh, well, how many championships did you win? No, they're going to say, wow, what an awesome experience that must have been. Yep. And so I think those things are so vital in that message always being to our player or our child of what you're gaining just intrinsically, as opposed to, because it's hard to separate the two, especially competitive people and you know, the investment that Jason talked about. Well, I'm paying all this money, you better be doing all these things. And we got to separate ourselves from those emotions. Gosh, because it is fan, parent. I love it. I'm never going to forget that. I love it.
I'm going to make sure that at the next soccer match my son has, that I'm going to go as far away as I can from everybody. Going to be that guy. Just like go sit, you know.
Just mix it up, you know, like they tell you when you're going, you got to sit in a different part of the classroom, or you got to try to change your perspective. And I think it's not just the kids who have to have this constant growth mindset that Aaron mentions. The adults do too. And so I think that has been my approach through my whole life, and why I took on this project in the first place is because I wanted to be and to continue to be. And you don't ever arrive there. Like no one's ever going to be that perfect coach or that perfect parent. It's a constant process, and it's a constant growing and looking at every opportunity we have as a way to learn. If you go through life that way and wake up in the morning knowing that today you're going to learn something new, it's just a phenomenal way to look at the world. And if we can give that gift to each other, that we're all learning and we're all getting better and we're all improving, and that we're doing it for the athletes and the kids we have the most access to, then that's all good. I call that all good.
Mm-hmm. I like to put my figurative camouflage on, and I actually like to sit with the opposing parents. They don't know that my son plays on the other team usually, and I just sit and listen.
Isn't it interesting? It's so interesting. Yeah.
It is incredibly enlightening. And it happened quite a few times in the fall season. I don't say a word. I sat there very calmly, very patiently. It was incredibly eye-opening, actually. So, Meagan, the last thing I want to ask before I make sure that we get a chance to plug your work and where people can find you, tell me what you're like as a coach. And you've mentioned being a coach a few different times. Describe your demeanor, describe sort of your approach in terms of, the work itself.
Okay, so I coach, now I coach boys, and I will be coaching girls high school soccer teams. And I've coached youth, and I've coached college, and high school is certainly where I fit best. I think you figure out like where's your sweet spot. I like the high schoolers a lot. And I would say that I'm very quiet during the games. My instruction is during practice or on the sideline when the players are right with me. There's very little that parents will hear from me on the other side. And I try to tell them that at the beginning, that just because you don't hear me at the games does not mean that I'm not working my butt off for your kids, because I am. And I'm definitely just a quiet, I would say analytical sort of coach. So I am constantly looking at the game from the chess piece sort of mentality, watching what's happening from the other. That's the part I love about coaching, is the strategy part of figuring out, and it's, player for player, putting combinations of players together, the problem solving. I was a center midfielder, so I see the game from that perspective. And I do think it matters the position you played, like how I had a goalie as an assistant this year, and he's like, I just want to stand at the back of the net and watch the game from here. And I'm like, I can't stand that. Like, I want to be up above if I can see anything. So my strategy for the games is that quiet, analytical. For the practices, I am really like kind of invested in fun. I really, really want our athletes to enjoy the process of skill acquisition. And so there's lots of ways that you can be creative in how you develop soccer players. And so I like to study that, to figure that out, to figure out where kids are developmentally and what things I can bring to them to make them better, to challenge them, to push them. And so practices, our practices will start with a game and end with a game, something fun on either end. And then I really spend a lot of time planning my practices because I want them to be super effective for as many of the kids as I can. My off season, I throw a ball into a gym and I let them play. No matter how old they are, we just play pickup soccer at least once a week, where I just throw the ball out. They figure it out, the little kids. So we're doing this in the winter now, and the younger parents are coming. I'm like, it's okay that I'm not talking to them. They will figure it out. Kind of like recess. They're just figuring out who's going to be on the teams. All I do is throw the pennies out and just let them play. And I have to keep reassuring the parents, like, it's okay. This is just a pickup soccer day. This is not practice. This is not technical training. Those are for other times. Right now, they're just going to play pickup soccer. And the kids love it. The kids are coming in droves to do that, to just show up and play scrimmages. And in our town, we need more programming. I need more coaches. I need a lot of people that have some knowledge to kind of grow the technical part of it. But we're doing what we can to just make it a thing that people do here, is to play soccer. So that's my approach so far.
I love it, and I love how invested you are, not only in the development of players, but just as people. And
oh, hold on, I can't hear you.
How about now?
Okay, that's better.
Okay. If people want to follow along in your journey and connect with your work, what is the best way that they can follow you?
Well, the Twitter account seems to be my most active online, which is Meagan Frank, MEAGAN FRANK _CTG, which is choosing to grow, my whole kind of umbrella for all the work that I do, whether it's for marriage or sports, or there's other projects that are in the work there. So that's one place. And then the teamadultplaybook.com is the website that's being built right now. The book is out for proposal, so that hopefully will be coming together soon in the next year or so. And then there's also a Facebook page that I am not as good at engaging at, I have to admit, but that does exist. And I'll sometimes share articles or things that I find, or some of my research as I'm blogging about it will be up there.
Very cool. I will be sure to put a link to all those in the show notes, and that listeners can connect with you and follow along. And you're a good follow on Twitter, and you always share just, I think, insightful, and have read a number of your blog articles, just really good stuff. So
thank you.
Meagan, really enjoyed having you on the latest episode of the On the Touchline podcast, and welcome back anytime. So when you're on your book tour,
I appreciate that very much. I really have enjoyed this, and I like meeting people who are also going to grow me. And I feel like both of you guys are going to give a lot of a lot of good material for me to be continuing to improve as a human, because I need that too. So I'm looking forward to
It's all Aaron on that one.
That's all we're here for, man. Just try to be better every day.